Right. I abandoned the far right for a number of reasons. My primary motive for abandoning the far right was the Charleston, South Carolina church massacre. Throughout the last 8 years, I have seen a lot of violence and a lot of hate coming from the far right, and also from coming from the far right and the various racist cults. And I have seen a lot of violence and a lot of hate coming from the far right and the various racist cults associated with the far right. As one might assume, I am not one to give, as one might assume, in 2023, I am not one to give in to the beliefs of far right racist cults. I am not the biggest fan of in 2023. I am not the biggest fan of racist cults and the far right, and neither are many. That is why I am willing to work with that is why I'm work with willing to work with various communities here with the community for interracial solidarity um, to help build better relationships to help build better relationships with 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 minorities in North Texas so that we can understand our sufferings and our so we can understand our sufferings and so we can understand why we have suffered and what we have suffered. And I'm perfectly willing to lay down all my joys in this world, in this life. And I am perfectly willing to lay down all my joys in this life so that my friends can have a better life. Because if I have to die so that my friends can have a better life, you know, then I'll do it. If I also have to die so that my family can have a better life, then I would also do that. But I'm only willing to do it if it's a last resort. You know, I've seen, you know, I've seen people of color suffer because of, I've seen people of color suffer at the hands of, I've seen people of color suffer because of ignorance. I've seen people with learning disabilities suffer because of ignorance. And it's all thanks to the far right. I know for a fact that there are members of racist cults that have infiltrated there. I know for a fact that racist cults and the far right have infiltrated ICF and HCS disability providers. And my goal is to put an end to it. I know for a fact that there are racist cults and members of the far right in ICF and HCS disability providers. And and just let's just think about it for a minute. What happens when you cross that line from reality into fantasy? You know, I mean, the what from what I've been through, starting as in my adult, starting in 2011, in early 2011, when I went to Devereaux, and then giving all the pain and all the horrendous actions that the horrendous abuse that Devereaux perpetrated against me, and the fact that Westlake High School condoned and encouraged the abuse. Ann Nelson should be in jail. Ann Nelson should be in prison for domestic violence. Ann Nelson should be in jail for disability hate crime. You know, Ann Nelson should be in jail for disability hate, should be in prison for disability hate crime. And I realized that, and like I've said before, I realized that, that the Americans with Disabilities Act is what has really helped people with learning disability with is what has helped people with varying levels of disability. Is I've really realized that the Americans with Disabilities Act is what has helped people with varying levels of disability um, have some sense of normality in this country. And for places like Devro to come in and just destroy all of that, that's just not right. It's wrong, it's illegal, it's immoral, it's a breach of the Americans. What Devro did to me, what Devro, DNS, and Mary Lee, Avid and Innovative Steps did to me is, a serious breach of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I realize that greed makes people do stupid things. And, I just and realizing that, and, having realized that greed makes people do stupid things, I'm perfectly willing to make sure that no one else in this country gets abused by Devereaux. I'm willing to make sure that the people who that the people at Devereaux get prosecuted for disability hate crime. I'm perfectly willing to make sure that Devereaux is is placed under government supervision. I'm perfectly willing to do that. I'm just as willing to make sure that Devereaux is placed under government supervision and that Devereaux has restrictions placed on it. I'm just as willing to keep Americans with disabilities safe from the evil that is Devereaux. I mean, just thinking, knowing that Devereaux has a history of domestic violence, I'm willing to keep Americans with disabilities safe. Mm, She literally. All right, so I'm back. I'm literally back. So, um, you know, I realized that having realized that the Americans with Disabilities Act is what keeps people with learning disabilities going in this country. You know, the Americans with Disabilities Act is also what keeps me going. It's also what gives me, a sense of hope. It's like the Americans with Disabilities Act is what also gives me a sense of hope. It's also what, gives me, a sense of hope. The Americans with Disabilities Act is just it's all, in recent years it's always given me in the past couple of years the past couple of years it's always given me a sense of hope. It's always been a symbol of hope for me that times can get better, and that, I don't have to constantly live in fear. I don't have to constantly live in fear of I don't have to constantly live that I don't have to constantly live in fear. But, you know, unlike all the people now who are suffering, but unlike all the people who are suffering and shell shocked, but all I have to say is, like, unlike all the people now who are suffering and shell shocked, you know, I take that personally, like, what I'm always going through the scenario I'm always running in my mind is like, what if I have to attend the funeral of one of my friends who have learning disabilities? Like, what if, I have to attend the funeral of one of my friends who has learning disabilities? What if they end up, what if they end up committing suicide over the amount of, abuse, and because of the abuse that their provider is subjecting him or her to, I should say. I don't want to be the one who has to attend a friend's funeral. You know, I don't want to have to attend a friend's funeral, but I realize that it could be a reality. It could be a reality one day, and you know, like recently, one of the one of the people that worked at Camp Summit when I started at Camp Summit, Lisa Brazel. Um, I literally had to I literally had to read her obituary recently. I literally had to read her obituary recently. So, I'm taking this personally, So, I'm really taking this personally. I really do take this personally, realizing that, like, of all the people now who are suffering and shell shocked, I really do take this personally from just all the people who are suffering because, of of what what ICF and HCS group home staff have done to them, and what people with learning disabilities have done, what because of what ICF and HCS group home staff are doing to them, and what people with learning disabilities have also done to them. All I can say is, like, I just hope that, that the people with learning disabilities who have mistreated ICF and HCS group home staff and people out in the community just get, ultimately get the help they need, and get professional help, and get the, in that they get they get rule, they get that a judge gets them the help they need. And so I'm just praying to God that